Welcome to another FPL video ahead of Game Week 11. I'm going to be covering the best wildcard team and talking about which players I think would be locked in and which players we can start to bring in after Game Week 12, which will be the blank between Manchester City and Arsenal. Let's get this video to over 300 likes and let's keep on pushing towards 16,000 subscribers. But let's just get straight into this one. It's slim pickings in goal right now. No one is actually offering any value. There's no points and not enough clean sheets across the board. And the only goalkeeper who I would trust to get maybe 15 plus clean sheets this season is Ederson. But I wouldn't waste a precious City spot on a Man City goalkeeper, especially when they blank in Game Week 12 as well. So you're really looking down the list. Nick Pope, Jose Sarr, Pickford, Gaeta, and possibly Raya and Sanchez are the top options. But there's just not enough really to make one the standout over the other. I've just gone for Nick Pope because despite not getting any saves or bonus points in the last 3 games, he still is one of the very best choices. And I know he's 5.3 million, which is very expensive, but I still like that double up with him and Trippier. But I have to say, some of the games coming up are pretty tough from a defensive perspective, and I don't expect that many clean sheets for Newcastle. And I also said this a few weeks ago when they had some easier games, and Nick Pope still hasn't been able to deliver in my team since I got him in Game Week 8. It's really Trippier. If you had to pick one Newcastle defensive coverage, Trippier is by far the standout, and I would go for him over Pope, but it becomes really tricky. Let me know which goalkeeper you would go for, and if there was one with standout fixtures that I trusted to get saves and also some clean sheets, then I would go for them. I'm guessing most people would point towards Gaeta, but I just don't see it with him in terms of the points in the ceiling. I know he did pick up a save point in Game Week 10, but my personal opinion is that Nick Pope remains the best goalkeeper, but I'm very reluctant about that because he hasn't been delivering. Jose Sarr could potentially become the best option, but I want to see how Wolves do under their new manager, and of course they still haven't got a permanent one yet. And Ward is my second goalkeeper here. He's the only one who plays at 4 million, so he speaks for himself, but really the goalkeepers have been an absolute flop so far this season. We have the same backline as we did in the Game Week 10 best wildcard team, but we've got Tarkowski instead of his teammate Connor Cody. And if you have the funds and the means to do it, then go for Connor Cody. But there's a reason why I've gone for the cheaper option, because it opens up the possibilities of making upgrades after Game Week 12 to bring in some extra Arsenal Man City players. You can go for 4 or even 5 players from these two teams, but I would recommend going for 3, especially on a wild card in the week just before they're blank in Game Week 12. I just don't think it makes any sense to completely load up on them, and I definitely wouldn't go for 6. I think that would be a huge mistake, and you would almost be forcing yourself into a free hit, which I think would pay dividends more so later in the season with double game weeks and maybe even blank game weeks later on, but not right now. So I would go for Tarkowski instead of Cody potentially, but that's only if budget's an issue and if you want to make further upgrades later down the line. Trippier remains here, same with Cancelo and James. They've been featuring in all of my recent wildcard teams, and if I'm being completely honest, they are the 3 defenders that I would definitely go for on the wildcard, and the rest is up in the air, and I just don't know which options right now would be the best. I know in the long term I'd like Saliba, and he is the one you can bring in for either Anderson or Tarkowski, and that makes 4 defenders that are quite nailed on. But then you look at the rest and there's no real standouts. Crystal Palace have some great fixtures, but they're not keeping clean sheets, so I don't think Anderson or any Crystal Palace defender is a must-have actually. So that remains in the air, and I know he's a budget option, but you would still expect a bit more in terms of points in general. So it's kind of a really tricky one. But Trippier, Cancelo and James speak for themselves. Obviously, James was very disappointing in Game Week 10. If he had started, he would have got probably a huge return. Cancelo is by far the best option in the defence. I said this last week and all season, and he's now by far the top scoring defender, and Trippier is probably the second best at this moment in time. He has been delivering in almost every single game, and I can't lie, I never expected that going into this season, and you know, his consistency can't go unnoticed. Fair play to him, clean sheets, free kick goals, assists, you name it, but Trippier is a bonus points machine as a result. So really those 3 are out of the question, especially Cancelo and Trippier, but the rest is quite malleable. But I would maybe bring in an Arsenal Spurs defender in the weeks to come, and Saliba and Dyer are potentially 2 of the very best options, but I'd look at them more so in Game Week 13 onwards rather than right now. I ultimately would go for Phil Foden or Bukayo Saka, and you could even go for both of them, but in Game Week 11, I would just wildcard to this, and you can always have the money in the bank, and that's what I do with this team, to do Zaha up to Phil Foden in Game Week 13, and you could also do Joachim Andersen to Saliba, and you want to start loading up on the Arsenal and City players, maybe get 4 to 6 players after Game Week 12 and not beforehand, especially if you're wildcarding. And it might be a bit of a pain because Zaha has some great fixtures and you might want to keep him by the time you are looking to get Foden in around Game Week 13. But it's something to think about. Maddison's another one, to be fair, and he is my favourite 8 million midfielder, but with the way Foden and Saka are going, they are definitely giving him a good run for his money, and those are, in my opinion, the top 3 options, and I would be very happy to have all 3 at some point. Leandro Trossard is still a great choice. He wasn't that impressive against Spurs, and I had a feeling he could blank, despite some good performances against Spurs recently. But even in the Game Week 10 wildcard team, he was someone that you could even bench in that game week, but you want him for these games against Brentford, who are off form. They just conceded 5 to Newcastle, and Trossard is the best Brighton asset by far. Andres Pereira is the budget option of choice. He scored as well, and a lot of you would have had him come in, especially for Mitrovic, who was absent. And Andres Pereira has been very clutch this season, and most of the time when he's called upon, he has done a good job. And then you've got Martinelli, who was electric against Liverpool, just like he was against Spurs, but he got even more points this time round, and he is the best option at his price and below. And the only one who rivals him, in my opinion, is Trossard, and then you potentially have Rashford, and that's probably the order of the best midfielders around 6.7 million and below. And this wildcard squad covers most of these budget options, and it also gives you the flexibility to get someone like Foden and or Saka. And the 2 options that you probably have to get rid of in order to get these players would be Zaha and or Maddison. So it's completely up to you, and let me know your thoughts about this. If you were to get one of those Arsenal City midfielders, who would be the sacrificial lamb? We're just 9 games into the season, and Haaland has 102 FPL points. So let's just forget about him. Let's pretend he doesn't exist, and let's focus on the rest of this team. So the 2 yellow flag strikers are a big concern. I don't think Kane will be out. He picked up a knock against Brighton, but he should be fine. And we do see if he starts or not in Spurs' crucial game in the Champions League against Frankfurt at home. So keep an eye on that one. I'm not too concerned about him, but with Mitrovic, things have actually gone south in the last few days. So before Game Week 10, Marco Silva said in his press conference that he should be available in Game Week 11 against Bournemouth, but now he's not as certain and things don't look as good. He's been feeling some pain in the last 2 or 3 days, so Mitrovic is a big doubt, so let's wait and see. And if he is, I wouldn't go to Daka despite him starting in Game Week 10. Martial is my favourite, kind of differential punt, but he came off injured against Everton, so you're really looking at Callum Wilson as a like-for-like replacement, or Ivan Toney, and I would favour Wilson at this moment in time, and I actually have 1.3 million left in the bank, but it would only take 1 price rise or fall for that plan to be torn apart. And to be honest, I could also get rid of Maddison instead, and that wouldn't be an issue as well. But you can do Mitrovic up to Wilson. I know some people might not have my value, but you should still have enough to go from Mitrovic to Wilson if needed. And you also have Ivan Toney to think about, who is still a decent option, but his fixtures aren't that great, especially in Game Week 12. So I think the squad will look really good. Hopefully Mitrovic and Kane are fit, and if they are, this would be my wildcard team for sure in Game Week 11. And in terms of the best time to wildcard, of course, it's all team dependent. But if you still have that wildcard in your back pocket, I would consider using it in either Game Week 12 or even better yet, I would use it in Game Week 13 and load up on those Arsenal and City players for the remaining 3 or 4 game weeks before the World Cup. If we head over to the FPL.team website and visualize how this would look in future game weeks as well, let's look at Game Week 11 very quickly, and this is how we'd line up. So Pope would be in goal with James, Cancelo and Trippier completing the defence, Maddison, Trossard, Zaha and Martinelli also forming the midfield, and we've got Haaland, Mitrovic and Kane up front, with Haaland captain away to Liverpool and Kane vice-captain. But I have to say, if you want to gain rank and you also are backing Liverpool to maybe produce a surprise result, whether it's a draw or win, then you could maybe go for a different captaincy option. I don't think you absolutely have to captain Haaland in Game Week 11, but with the way Liverpool are playing, they're defending as well against Arsenal and throughout the whole season, I have to say I am going to captain Haaland. He also had a lot of opportunities in the Community Shield, which he just failed to bury really, and on another day he would have scored 2 or 3 goals. And the bench is also looking pretty decent with Ward, Anderson, Andres Pereira and Tarkowski. Now let's look at Game Week 12, and this is where we don't have Haaland, so who do we captain? Well, with this wildcard team, you've got Harry Kane to choose from on top of Maddison and Trossard, and when you look at the fixture, Trossard for me is the number 1 pick, and you also look at kind of form players. Kane and Maddison would be my top 2 picks. They've been fantastic all season, and also in the last campaign you would have a full 11 as well, as you only have 3 Arsenal plus Man City players in Martinelli, Cancelo and Haaland. They would all be benched, and I would start Nick Pope over Ward, and the rest speaks for itself. So let me know how this team looks like in Game Week 12. Do you like it? Do you think it maybe lacks a little bit something? Because you still have a few options like Tarkowski and Andres Pereira who aren't the greatest, but you at least get appearance points unless they get sent off or something like that. And then let's look ahead to Game Week 13, which is the week just after when these City and Arsenal players come back into our squads. Haaland will be the captain against Brighton, and you've got Kane as a vice-captaincy option against Newcastle. Cancelo, Martinelli also look pretty good, and you've got a decent structure here, and even the bench is looking pretty solid, and you would have some benching dilemmas. Trippier away to Tottenham. You've also got Nick Pope as well, who I'm actually going to bench in Game Week 13 potentially for Ward, because if Wolves are still struggling to score goals, then maybe I will go for the Leicester shopstopper for once. But the most important takeaway with this wildcard squad is flexibility. In my case, I have around 1.3 million in the bank, so what I could do is get Saliba and Phil Foden in for Maddison and Joachim Andersen as one particular example. But I'm actually more interested in the Arsenal midfielders and attackers like Gabriel Jesus instead. So let's say I want to get Phil Foden in no matter what, then that's completely fair enough. I could maybe bring him in for Leandro Trossard at this point, because Brighton don't have the greatest fixtures anyway, and the big appeal for Trossard for me is Game Weeks 11 and 12 when he faces Brentford away and Nottingham Forest at home. But Phil Foden and Saka will be the two that I really want to get into this squad, and despite Joachim Andersen and Crystal Palace struggling defensively, I still think with those fixtures there should be a few clean sheets on the horizon, so it's a bit tricky, but let's go for something like this, and then Saliba could come in for Joachim Andersen. Or I could actually go for someone a bit cheaper who has actually been playing as a right back. He's been getting better offensively every single time, and that is Ben White, and he's a bit cheaper. And then with that money, I still can do Zaha up to Phil Foden, and this would improve the squad even more. You've still got Harry Kane, you've got the really good value Mitrovic up front on top of Haaland, and you've got a really good structure here with 5 Arsenal plus Man City players, and this will be for 2 free transfers in Game Week 13, and you still have some money left in the bank potentially, and those of you with more money than me, then, you know, even better for you still, and you can make some further upgrades later down the line. So let me know what you think of this wildcard team. It is similar to the last few we talked about, so maybe some of those picks weren't too shabby, but it is a bit unfortunate we have this Game Week 12 blank, and I think it has maybe skewed our decision making, and I have made some mistakes. You know, sometimes when you look too much into this blank, it prevents you from getting the points right in front of you from the 2 best teams in the country right now, Arsenal, Man City. So it's a bit of a shame, but honestly, with 1 game week to go before the blank, I would suggest not filling your team up with Arsenal and City players and doing that just after Game Week 12, and it's very, very achievable with this wildcard team. But thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video or found it useful, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe if you're new. Let's get this video to over 300 likes, and let's get to 16,000 subscribers and then push on even further. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and also check the links in the description below, including the Patreon, the channel memberships, the Discord server, and the FPL League. All of that is there. Thank you to all the channel members, patrons, and subscribers. Thank you very much for that, and I wish you all the best of luck for Game Week 11 and the rest of the season, and I'll see you next time.